get this.
Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation finds you. I am Travis Gray, and today we are transforming with an incredible guest, Lindsay Briner. Lindsay is a neuroscience meditation thought leader. She is also an advisor, executive coach, speaker, and teacher. She is an incredible scholar in the areas of fundamental well-being, enlightenment. A lot of you might not be aware that enlightenment, spiritual awakening, this field, there's a field of study around these ideas, these spiritual topics. But a lot of you, if you've already been tapped into Gray Transforms, then you know the field of transpersonal psychology is heavily interested in these sorts of topics. Lindsay Briner is an expert in these areas. Lindsay, how are you?
Thanks so much, Travis, for the intro and for having me. So happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. So we are alumni of the same university in the master's degree at Sophia University, and we have a mutual friend, Samantha Sweetwater.
Yeah.
So that's really amazing. Samantha and I had a really great conversation on the podcast not too long ago. So people will really enjoy some of this. So what is the story of Lindsay Briner? How did you get into this work? How did you become a leading scientist in this research?
Let's see, how far back should I go? Well, so I started with my master's degree in counseling and transpersonal psychology. And before and during my master's, I've been seeing clients for 10 years doing a variety of methodologies, NLP, hypnosis, a lot of limiting belief work. And so I was seeing clients all through my master's and decided that I didn't want to do traditional licensed therapy and wanted to do research. And continued to see clients, ended up at the Transformative Technology Lab at Sophia University, analyzing a huge data set under Jeffrey Martin on a variety of meditation techniques and applied neuroplasticity using positive psychology. And at the time, I just started attracting, because of my connections through the lab, I started attracting a lot of executive clients. And because of my learning that I did while I helped run the experiment, the Finders course. So I put hundreds of participants and guided them through this experience of meditation and positive psychology, and took a lot of that as inspiration into my coaching practice with executives and started teaching meditation. And since then started studying and publishing a paper with Roger Walsh of UC Irvine on human motivation, and kind of developed my practice even further, which led me and then also studied under Dan Brown, my meditation teacher, and Dustin DePerna, who are incredible scholars as well. And basically created a synthesis of all of this inspiration and great mentors and teachers that I had to come up with my methodology for leadership development training and executive coaching that I call stabilized flow. And so it's different than the standard traditional model of flow state, which is a game time mentality. A state as a temporary experience of unity and action, as defined by Csikszentmihalyi. But in my paper that's coming out with Roger Walsh, where we add 3 higher levels of development to Maslow's model and kind of articulate it in a way where these 3 higher stages of development can be bridged to not just Maslow, but any developmental model in Western psychology. And we bring in a multicultural approach to naming these 3 higher stages. One is selfless service. After self-transcendence, there's selfless service, and then what we call motivation transcendence, and then what we call transpersonal spontaneity. And so, it's a multicultural approach, a lot of Eastern Buddhist approaches to name and define these three higher levels. And it's also kind of a framework for how I define my method in stabilized flow, which is like a flow trait, the unity and action in every moment, right? Where the meditation practice is not just to access a sense of effortless inner peace while sitting, similar to flow state. It's like a temporary game time mentality for your one task. Right. But the idea of meditation is to be in that effortless inner peace in all times, in all situations. And that the sitting practice is just to train the brain to get into that state, to be able to maintain it in all areas of your life. So then I started bringing these concepts and techniques to developing my stabilized flow method, which has been really fun.
Yeah. That sounds extraordinary. It sounds like the best kind of work that anybody would want to be involved in. Really, really amazing. So that work of Mahile is really interesting. So famous for writing a book called Flow, and a book that I actually just tossed away from me. But I was there is a paragraph in there that I read last night in kind of preparation for this conversation, and he spoke about the requirements of complexity of consciousness, and that's what I thought was really interesting, because the work of Jeffrey Martin, that when I have listened to him speak about the non-symbolic consciousness, it has not been a term that it doesn't seem to fit what I am observing from my point of view, my perspective on what these higher states, this peak performing states are, and how the ongoingness of that can be for a person. So the stabilized awakening for you, this is a trait. So how does one obtains this trait through meditation practice? But is this does somebody practice ongoingly? Is life becoming the practice, or every day they have to do something to still maintain this state?
Yeah, well, it depends on what stage of development that the person is in and what the extent of the inner work that they've done. And so I combine the style of meditation that I teach with a lot of limiting belief work, what I call identifying the false self narrative. And so we identify the gestalt of the core of the false self narrative, our conditioned mind that stem from, childhood traumas that get, these belief systems that we opt into and then get reinforced by culture and society or our family system, and just kind of identifying the gist of that false self-narrative, where it comes from, doing some rewiring around that, and then combine it with the meditation. I find that to be really effective. And that's how my teacher kind of approached it too, Dan Brown, is that we run into these limiting beliefs that are running in the background constantly in our meditation practice too. So the combination of either psychotherapy or limiting belief work with a coach with the meditation is really kind of the golden ticket. And then I also add in the applied neuroplasticity, which is kind of rewriting or reauthoring the narrative mind, like giving the ego, something more effective to do, right? Instead of just being on the automatic of our subconscious mind.
So what is the narrative for somebody in this sort of state, this sort of having maybe having acquired this trait on a continuous basis, something that is ongoing, persistent for them?
Yeah. Well, the characteristics of stabilized flow is actually a significant decrease in the narrative mind, and then a bringing online and a flourishing of more and more positive traits, and also like a significant decrease in negative states. And so the narrative mind, for the most part, is just kind of in the background, but when it is there, it's confident and it's clear, and it's not an egoic confidence. It's like an effortless clarity of mind, with great presence.
Yeah, so it's like they know themselves. They don't require the mind to do the constant commenting on all of the pieces of their lived experience.
Yeah, it's like that in the voice of the inner critic just kind of fades into the background.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been doing this work and this synthesis of it?
I've been doing the stabilized flow work for 6 or 7 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So how have you seen improvements in your own performance and your scholarly work? You are an advisor for a lot of great companies. You've done a lot of great work. Have a lot of amazing mentors around you. How has your performance deepened, or how has that increased based on being involved in this work?
Yeah. Well, I decided, to work with primarily executives and doing leadership training, because I found that could relate to these high achievers, because I'm one of them, right? And what I teach and what I practice for myself has a lot to do with motivation, and that's this paper with Roger Walsh that's being published in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. And it's basically what we map out. And in my own experience for myself is we identify this false self narrative, these limiting beliefs. I found that they get locked into the nervous system, into fight or flight, where we're being motivated by fear. Fear of failure, fear that I'm not enough, fear that I'll always be alone, and then these coping mechanisms of I have to be perfect, put up this facade of perfectionism and competence, or like I have to prove myself, and then they get these dynamics of the limiting beliefs and the coping mechanisms become automated. And it's like a survival pattern that also has great gifts that come with it. And for high performers, it's the determination and the grit of like, nothing's going to get in my way, but at some point we get to a place in our growth and our development where there's no longer a need, or with a coach like myself or some other support, where we find that there's no longer a need to be in the survival. Or we get to, like, a lot of my clients are in a place of total burnout where they're like, because they've been running these algorithms of fear and addiction to the adrenaline and cortisol. So it's about shifting how the motivational axiom is being run in the system out of fear or scarcity or insecurity into altruism. That's that first stage that we add to Maslow's model after transcendence. Self-transcendence is selfless service. And that's how, and then the next one is motivation, transcendence. And where, our experience of being motivated to be productive or to achieve gets radically deconstructed and reconstructive to be one of altruism, and that's in Buddhism, it's called bodhicitta, and every time, you sit down to practice, to sit, you set your intention, you evoke the bodhicitta that may my practice serve not only myself, but for all beings to be free from suffering. And the way that I teach it, from a non-dogmatic perspective with my clients, is that by you learning how to love yourself, to be totally self-contented and trust yourself, and to intend to reach your full potential in that way and be on this path in this lifetime, is only going to positively benefit all of your relationships, all of the people around you, all of your projects and businesses, and therefore have an invisible domino effect of positive impact into the world. And so just doing that intention setting can help modulate how you're running motivation in your system, while also deconstructing the fear of failure, the scarcity, the insecurity, and all these things. And it's like a reprogramming of like what's truly motivating us. And anchoring ourselves in a practice of this bodhicitta, or being motivated by altruism for the benefit of the whole system. And as you know, and as a transpersonal psychologist, transpersonal means like beyond self, or like beyond the ego mind, where the locus of identity is in the ego. And that's like the false self structure, right? And so when we transcend, like one of the primary characteristics is that the locus, as Maslow defines it, is the locus of identity shifts from the sense of self as an identity construct, or ego, to the sense of self as interconnected to the whole. Or from the Buddhist perspective, the sense of self becomes the field of pure awareness outside of the self, beyond these identity structures, right? And so that's when you have that experience, and either spontaneously or intentionally through the gradual path on, a meditation practice, that's how we can generate like a real, authentic, altruistic motivation, because we get a visceral, direct experience that everything really is connected, and that we're here to be of service to the planet and to humanity, and or just our family and friends.
It's so practical. It's so it ties all of these spiritual concepts that are sometimes very much outside the reach of people, very, very much on the edges of where people can get to, and sometimes there's like an identity structure around the tradition of Christianity, or the tradition of other spiritual traditions, that this identity construct is like I am a part of this instead of a part of the whole, and then I'm separate from this, and that has caused war for centuries in human society, in the blossoming of this world. So it's so practical to take these ideas and make it about the whole, make it about the giving to humanity, giving to the interconnectedness of us all. You said all of that so beautifully.
I should add, because it's a slippery slope, where you asked about my personal experience, and I'm just like, I'm remembering this one retreat that I did, where I realized that even being motivated to be of service, it can become an identity construct too, right? And then the practice becomes to even let go of the outcome of what you're trying to achieve. It's like that, the algorithm of achieving to do anything, right? And when we can even let go of the identity, the ego that becomes wrapped around being of service, and then the next stage is motivation, transcendence. And it's just like, but it's kind of a setup, because then you're motivated to be of service, and you kind of orient your life or your work in that way. And then at some point, if you continue to grow and mature and develop in practice, then you even let go of that. But then your life is set up just to do that. And then you can be in this effortlessness of like, well, okay, here I am. So it's just happening, and I don't need to strive to achieve the service, because it was just already set up. And that was what was really beautiful for me with my work, is I set up my business, and I was so determined and so motivated to be of service, and my achiever mode got wrapped into that identity structure. And when I was able to step out of that, like my business was just running, and I could step out of that, how it's running in my mind and in my identity structures, and still be of service, but have it be more of this from this transpersonal spontaneity place, where it's this kind of this effortlessness moving through me, and I'm just living my life. And then I can orient my, the central organizing principle becomes my capacity to just maintain in this state of stabilized flow, and I'm of service because I set it up already, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So the identity can also become like, oh, I'm here to change the world.
Yeah,
I'm serving the world. I'm here to change the world. This is what I'm going to do every day. I'm going to work on changing the world.
Yeah, and then you have to let that go.
And that's a very fiery excitement that will drain you very quickly as well.
and push you into burnout. And then it goes against the whole point too, where in my, in the lineage that I'm currently practicing in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, it's like the end goal is the great completion, is the great perfection, where when we access these non-dual states of awareness, we realize that we would not have non-duality without the contrast of duality. They're co-emergent. You can't have one without the other. And like in Buddhist terms, we can't experience nirvana without the experience of samsara. They're co-emergent, and therefore it's all perfect. And so then in that realization of that not like true direct experience of non-duality, you realize like the beauty and the sacred world of perfection. And then there's nothing to really serve except having this broken, open heart of compassion for the beauty of it all, and for the people who don't see that perfection, that are stuck in their suffering and their trauma and this and that. And then the service just becomes this holding this state of seeing the perfection, and just holding the compassion for yourself, all the way through, to be able to have like true, authentic, absolute compassion for others. And that becomes the practice, right?
Yeah. So it's really awesome that we can be scholars and scientists in this incredible field of study, and that we can have healthy criticisms of scholars and still really appreciate their work. Really great example is Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber is an amazing scholar, so brilliant, has done amazing work his entire life. The Albert Einstein of consciousness, people have called him. But there's very amazing critiques of his work as well. Dr. Jorge Freire is a really awesome scholar to my heart, and I really adore him. He's been on the podcast as well, and we've spoken about the criticisms that he's had very articulately made of Ken Wilber's work. And Dr. Jeffrey Martin. So Dr. Jeffrey Martin, I've mentioned his name a few times on this podcast because this is the subject matter that I'm most interested in as a scholar, as a scientist. And he has the Society of Non-Symbolic Consciousness, and this idea of non-symbolic consciousness, PNSE, persistent non-symbolic consciousness, or I really love his acronym ONE, ONE, ongoing non-symbolic conscious experience. That's it's just like, I love acronyms. Like he really dialed that in. That's really amazing. But I have often felt that the non-symbolic is like it's like a spiritual, it's like a non-dual bypassing of the reality of duality. Like you had just mentioned that the duality has to coexist to be in this non-dual as well. It all exists. It's kind of like a three-part thing going on. And I have spoken about, even with, like I mentioned before, I had a conversation with Samantha Sweetwater on the podcast as well. And we spoke about it is these two things weaving together to see that it is all the same, rather than a dissolving of like everything else is actually just an illusion, and it's not real. None of that symbolism means anything.
Yeah. So, well, I owe a lot to Jeffrey. I had an incredible experience working in his lab for almost 4 years. And
he's an amazing scholar, really an incredible human.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to analyze his humongous data set. And it's a great program too. A lot of people do make this transition into early stage awakening into what he calls non-symbolic experience, and it helps a lot of people. And as I developed after my time at his lab and developed in my own practice and found new teachers, particularly Dan Brown, and I learned that there's other, frameworks out there where this early stage of the transition, which Dan calls like a learned path. It's just a learned pathway in the brain out of temporal processing and the prefrontal cortex and into parallel processing, which is that unity in action. The anterior cingulate cortex gets upregulated, which is what flow state is, connected to, and then the parallel processing, which we all have. We all go into parallel processing while we drive, right? But so that there's stages of developing that learned pathway. And in Mahamudra, for example, the first stage of realization is initially one-pointedness, which is concentration training, to be able to get over into this other state, right? And maintain it. It requires a significant practice and concentration training and bringing metacognition online. And then once you're there and able to maintain it, there's the next stage is freedom from elaboration. And in that stage, there's these micro stages. And one of those micro stages under freedom from elaboration is the direct experience of non-dual consciousness. And that is what Jeffrey's terming, to my understanding, non-symbolic experience, right? But then it continues. Like that's just this early stage, and then it develops and you come back to liveliness. So in freedom from elaboration, to get into non-duality, we practice emptiness of self, emptiness of, all the perceptual sensations, and emptiness of phenomena like time and, objects in the space of awareness. And we get to non-duality in this emptiness, and then stabilize the view of emptiness. But then we come back to the liveliness, and then the practice is holding the liveliness, and it includes the self. It includes the liveliness of the narrative mind, the liveliness of the identity structures, the liveliness of this reality. And that's what Samantha calls enlightenment, is like really going into the liveliness and the value of holding the liveliness awareness in the forefront of our consciousness, because so much, from her eco-psychology perspective, it's so needed at this time that we're in, with the risks that we face with climate change and everything else that's going on, AI, et cetera. So I think she would agree with me that the risk of just going into emptiness, into the void, it can become nihilistic. Right. And also Elizabeth Stevens, who's someone that I met at the lab, who also worked under Jeffrey, she published her dissertation on the risks of, being in this non-symbolic experience, which is non-dual awareness. And she found in a population of people that claim PNSE or non-duality persistently, is that they're often disassociated and depersonalized. And so to come back to liveliness, to come back to the body is really critical from my view.
Yeah, that sounds right to me as well. It seems it's a bit paradoxical. The liveliness is also like the liveliness of the narrative mind is also the thing that keeps you from the state as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so we practice going into non-duality, to going, gone, beyond, gate, paragate, the Heart Sutra. We practice going into the field, to transcend into the field of awareness first, and then from that view, including the narrative mind. So it's experiencing the narrative mind from this parallel processing network in the brain. So I remember when I was like really stabilizing this state, I had to relearn how to do all doing all over again. I had to relearn how to hold this state and have conversations. And, the last task that was really challenging for me was being in the state and working on my dissertation, because it's a whole different, it's a different view. It's a different lens, a mode of perception.
Mm-hmm. Do you bring your family members into this?
In what way?
into this work? Do you have them, have you been able to, I find that a lot of people on this sort of path, like like one of the biggest challenges is like, how do I get my mom to like think this way? Like how do I get my mom to realize this? I had mentioned that my dissertation work right now is making meditation accessible to a population of deaf students. My mother is deaf. I did have her do a meditation, just a single meditation, and it was really great for her, really extraordinary. She's very open to it. However, how do you bring your family members into this? Like the people that are closest to you have such an impact, such an influence, and maybe they just don't understand. It's like, oh, I saw aliens, and then they don't, it's the same. It's a similar problem that people experience in spiritual emergency. In spiritual emergency, they're the people closest to them don't have a narrative or a willingness to have a dialogue with them about their experience in a compassionate way that is, this container of unconditional positive regard for them, maybe, that allows them to, really express and process whatever is going on for them. Do you bring your family members into this stabilized flow?
Well, my mother is an anomaly, and she was actually the one who opened this door into spirituality for me at a really young age. She is a nurse, and she brought Barbara Brennan's work and healing, the practice of healing touch for people in hospitals into Kaiser here in the Bay Area. And she has all kinds of practices that she does. And she's also sat with, trained with my same meditation teacher. And so it's a little anomalous, but I think my opinion generally on that topic, outside of my own personal experiences, is like to really just focus on yourself and be the embodiment, like be the exemplar, to just model it. It's like, and in the practice is like holding the great perfection, is the acceptance and allowance for everyone where they're at in any stage of development. The practice is equanimity, like non-judgment of self, non-judgment of others, and being, having a compassionate heart for where everyone's at, and then at some point it may be appropriate to share some teachings. And at that point, it's one of the reasons why I really appreciate what Jeffrey's doing and his frameworks around the locations and all of his research, is that it's really accessible. And that really taught me to go really a lot deeper into the research. I studied also with Arnaud Delorme, who's an EEG expert on meditation states. And I went really deep and really learned the science of these practices and all the different lineage traditions that have been studying, and the different areas of the brain that upregulate differently based on the different practices. And it's like, I feel like it can be more accessible when you use like a semantics or, these validated experiences, and, like what Jeffrey's doing, the language really makes it more accessible. But I'm not pushy, like my dad and my brother are great. And I share just from my own, about myself, and I don't make it about needing them to change, and I think their hearts and minds open from me just being vulnerable and authentic in my own experience without needing to tell them that they're broken and need something different.
Not that anyone is not. Yeah, I would not want to stress to somebody, oh, mom, you're broken. You're not thinking the right way. She's thinking exactly how she is meant to be thinking right now with where she's at, and that's perfectly fine. Do you have a partner that is in this with you, in this sort of mental state with you?
I do have a
Flow.
partner who's on the path. Yeah. Yeah. It's great to share the practices and be on a path of growth together. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder about like maybe the challenges of scholars, especially like doctoral scholars and relationships. Maybe that's personal projection, but it's just like if it'd be interesting to imagine a partnership that one is on this path, this stabilized flow, is experiencing this stabilized flow, and maybe the other partner is doing the very opposite work, and maybe that sort of dynamic of opposites attract, and that sort of thing. And then but then that might feel like, oh, this is the reason that relationship has culminated is because one is trying to fix the other, and then that's like concerning of like that what we just mentioned, like that your brother, your father is not broken in any way, that you are the exemplar, you are embodying what this experience is, and then it is for them to to find their own way to the path.
Yeah, totally.
Wow, this is really incredible. There's a lot of like very articulate ways to think about these things, and maybe requires some digestion for people. Definitely for myself and my own work. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it, Lindsay. Where can people connect with you and connect to your work further?
Yeah, I have some public group programs coming up where I'm sharing my formula for stabilized flow, and they can find me and access that group program on my website, lindsaybriner.com. It's Lindsay with an A, Briner. And if they sign up for my newsletter, they'll get some free content and information about the group.
Amazing. I'm signing up right now. And just thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. I hope we get to do this again.
Thank you so much, Travis. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you.
You're thinking, who is this man talking? I'm talking to you. You are the realest one you know. And if you need